All right, we apologize for the technical delay. We are back in as we were looking at the university experience. Ms. Rogers just shared a little bit with us. Let's go to Mr. Price. Just talk to us a little bit about your university experience, Mr. Price.
Okay, remember the time that I was at the university. This was in the early 70s and several years after, because I was one of those career students for a long time. And I'd been in the service where I had my first experience with non-African American, non-Caucasian people. And my first teaching experience was at a school that had somewhat traumatic experiences between as racial integration came into play. And the stories were very well known at that time. So there was a sensitivity and a knowledge that, hey, this recently happened here, and so I had that framework going into it. My university experience at Winthrop was very good. Most, if not all, of my teachers were white men. Who had been either superintendents. I think in most cases all of them had been superintendents. And one of them in particular had been a superintendent in a diverse system in Florida, and he referred to that frequently. So from that perspective, there was a lot of discussion about diversity and that type of thing from the experience of the curriculum addressing that, not so much.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Harris?
I received my master's from Gardner-Webb University, and then received a doctorate from Wingate. In regards to the information I received from both colleges, I got more from the scenario base. However, I found that they were very removed from current issues of today. And that when I went back to school and tried to apply some of the things that I've been told, in some cases, there was no connection. Some cases there were. And so I used what I could from both situations. In regards to diversity, there was little diversity within the staff of both colleges, Gardner-Webb or Wingate. Older Caucasian men are who taught me in both situations.
Okay. Mr. Filter, I'm going to pass on this one, but I'm going to jump in and add my 2 cents. I received my master's degree to be an administrator from Chapel Hill, and one of the reasons that I bring this up is I just wanted to say Chapel Hill after the national championship last night, and so there I've hit that mark. The other thing is what I found is that I do not know that I had a professor my entire level of coursework that ever served as a building level principal. It's as you know, it's a research-based university, and we had folks that had done all kinds of research. But if I had someone who had ever served as a high-end school leader, either at the school level or at the county level, I don't know it. They didn't. I mean, they could show you the textbooks they'd written, but that was that. So mine was even more removed potentially than yours. So we're going to start with Mr. Filter on this next step, and that is we're going to start talking about the role of the assistant principal in we're just over halfway through of my little section here. So we're going to talk about the role of the assistant principal, and one of the things just a couple of things that literature points out that is somewhat problematic when you're looking at training assistant principals. One of them is that regardless of how long you've been an assistant principal, the role of an assistant principal doesn't evolve. So in many cases, if you're a first-year assistant principal versus a 10th-year assistant principal, you can have two of those people in the same building and their experiences day to day are nearly the same. And we don't even do that with our teachers. Our veteran teachers, we expect more of them, but that doesn't appear to be the model across the country with APs. And as I reflect on my assistant principalship and my assistant principals, that rings true with them. Another thing about the role of the assistant principal is that it doesn't appear that we offer assistant principals nearly as much professional development as we do practicing principals and practicing teachers. So I find that to be kind of we don't focus much professional development at assistant principals. And then the final thing is this idea of the books, buses, and butts, and that assistant principals are very rarely given those larger leadership type experiences. So, Mr. Filter, I'm gonna start with you because I know you work closely with administrators on a daily basis. So talk to me how that reality or your perception of our current assistant principals and their roles.
As you were going through that scenario and I was trying to visualize all the different schools, and it pretty much seems like as I deal with administration, you know, if it's a facility type issue, I'm always dealing with the same assistant principal, and so that's the role. Once that principal assigns that role to that assistant principal, that's what they're doing, and they are not diversifying. As I was going through and received my education leadership degree and going through the internship, I certainly dabbled in all of those areas, but as I see the assistant principals in place, they are assigned a role, and that's the role that they continue to serve, you know, unless they become a principal.
Interesting, thank you. Anyone else like to chime in on that? Mr. Price, you were an assistant principal very long. I don't know if yours counts. How long were you an assistant principal?
A year and a half.
You don't count. You don't get the answer. We'll move on. Ms. Rogers?
I was an assistant principal for 3 years, where my teaching and curriculum experience was at the elementary level, but I became an AP at the middle school level. So vast new world. I had a lot to learn. I feel like I was fortunate in the fact that I complemented my principal. So my strengths that I brought to the table were utilized in a new middle school setting. So I had a lot of growth opportunities. I did take care of books, buses, and butts, and learned how to manage the day-to-day operations of school. However, I was also able to utilize my strengths, not as much as I wanted to, because you just don't have the time. But I did feel like I developed because I was at a different level.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to address that from
Okay,
the
I'm
perspective
sorry.
of a
And you're welcome to share. I'm just trying to be
From the
funny.
perspective of a principal,
Uh-huh.
yes, my experience as an AP, I remember very clearly going in one day when I was an assistant principal and telling my principal, okay, this teacher, this person told me something yesterday and you need to be aware of it. And he looked at me and said, you're an administrator, you deal with it.
Okay,
And I thought, oh, whoa, okay, all right.
okay.
As a principal, yeah, you definitely as a principal don't wanna deal with those three things. But I kinda made a deal with my APs. The deal was, you work hard, you work your rear end off, and I'm gonna do everything I can to promote you.
Okay.
And one part of that was we would have frequent meetings, and we would sit down and say, okay, for instance, if you were starting a school, pick 5 teachers on our staff you would like to take with you and tell me why.
Okay,
Or-
good question.
Or listen, you're gonna be one of these days interviewing for an assistant principalship, and there are gonna be other people in there, and they're gonna be asking you these questions. What's gonna stand out about you? And I said, okay, let's pick out something in curriculum or something in the school that's gonna make a big splash, and you be in charge of that, and I'll give you credit for it. And I did. Every time I would see a superintendent, I would try to make a comment about this assistant principal or
Okay.
that assistant principal to try to get that name
Okay,
in that administrator's head, because to me it's a fair trade-off. If you got people who are killing themselves for you out there at your school, you want to kill yourself for them to try to help promote them and get them a position to have their own school.
they were lucky. They were lucky to have you.
I think, when I was an assistant principal, the principal had a lot of say in the building, as they should, but my principal, when I was an assistant principal, gave me something and let me run with it. And I think that's what made me the principal I am. No details, just, you're gonna be a part of the STEMS program at Forest Hills High School. And she gave me that initiative, and I worked with CTE. We built a classroom, and gave me a little to no direction. You figure it out. Because sometimes as a principal, you're given little to no direction and you have to figure it out. And so that's what grew me, and that's why I try to pass to my assistant principals.
One of the things literature also kind of alludes to is the idea that there's the potential that an elementary school assistant principal's experience may be broader than that of an assistant principal at a middle school or a high school, because rarely, if you have an assistant principal in an elementary school, generally it's just one. Where in a middle school, you could have 2 or 3. High school, I worked at a high school with 5 at one point in time. So there's the opportunity for division of labor, but it also may limit someone's experience. Anyone care to comment on that idea?
I tend to agree going into a middle school. However, I was fortunate enough to be the AP that was relied upon the most.
Okay.
And I was observing every move and word my principal made, so that, like I said, we complemented each other, so his strengths weren't my strengths. And so I was able to be a part of and learn what his strengths were, and I utilize them to this day. And because I was relied upon, I think I had more experiences in the middle school because I could take on more responsibility with little direction and be successful with it the majority of the time, if that makes sense.
The flip side of that would be, and this is not in the literature, this is just my experience, and that is that there are some crisis-based responses that you need to learn in order to be successful. And I think you have a much better opportunity to have the opportunity to respond to a crisis in the middle and high school than you may in the elementary school. So there's a trade-off there in experience. Well, we're kind of growing near the end of my little piece here, so what I want to get to now is talk about, a specialized program, a principal preparation program, a program that your system may or may not have had, that was you were enrolled in or not enrolled in, and the purpose of that was to offer special training to a special group of assistant principals to prepare them to be principals. So let's, Mr. Filter, we'll start with you. You've worked with our group some, so I know you have some experience with it. So just tell me a little bit about your impressions of our program here.
So I've not been involved with the specific, but I think it's a good model that you're preparing assistant principals to ultimately become principals. What I often question who made that selection as to who's going to participate. Similar to your introductory question, were we led into that position, or did we inquire about that?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as an assistant principal, if I'm interested in participating, is that something that I can approach somebody and say, I want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I sitting and waiting for my principal to assign me that role to participate in that?
Okay. Mr. Price, did y'all have any sort of special program to train you to be a principal that you were enrolled in?
We didn't, there was no such thing.
Okay.
My experience came, as a counselor, my office was located right next to the administrative offices.
Okay.
And I taught frequently, and he taught frequently with me, the principal. And so, my experience came from being a teacher, a coach, a guidance counselor, being close to the administration, but there was no formal training.
Okay. Dr. Harris?
When I was coming up as an assistant principal, I do not believe that there was anything available. I think that came right after I became a principal. So no, it was just, I went into work and I tried to learn everything I could from my principal.
Ms. Rogers?
I did participate in Union County's AP Academy for the 3 years that I was an assistant principal, and maybe a year into it, the 2-tiered academies, Growing Leaders, was established. Don't know how that came about as far as access to that upper tiered program. I was not in that program, and felt like there was a lot of confusion as, well, how did he get to be a part of that? And it's coveted now. Like it's important to assistant principals to be, quote, on the fast track. But I think it's important to know that you don't have to be in that upper tier to pursue, a principalship, as I did find value in AP Academy though, because it tied it to the executive standards. And so I learned, a piece from the executive standards, which was very helpful to kind of have the standards expectations in place and how it played out in the day-to-day role.
Okay, thank you. Final comments will be this, and that is we have one of the things you look at when you are doing work for an advanced degree is you review the literature and you try to find a hole or a gap, and that's kind of where you focus. Well, one of the gaps that some of the research implies is that there appears to be potentially this gap between the leadership theory that is taught at the university level and the day-to-day operational practice that takes place in an assistant principal's professional career. And there's a gap between adding the operational aspects, attaching it to the leadership theory in the university, or taking the leadership theory and change theory and pushing it into day-to-day operations. So that's kind of where one of our gaps are, and that's where I'm doing some work. Anyone want to make a 30-second comment about whether or not they agree with the gap, they've seen that gap, or whether or not that gap is playing itself out at all in our
I agree
county?
100%. There is definitely a gap.
I think there is a gap between real-time experience within a district and what's being taught at university, absolutely.
And I would concur, as I went through the program and I was not was not an education major, but then had to acquire some of that background. But as you go through the leadership program, it is all about the different separate areas, but not necessarily about leadership, and I think that's an important component.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
There's such a difference in what's expected and what's going on in school these days and what was expected and what was going on at high schools in my day when I came up through this. I don't remember there being a gap. The only course that I recall actually being really, really helpful to me when I became a principal was school law, which was extremely helpful. But, and it's not because the others were not helpful, it's just that I don't remember everything. We're affected by everything. And so it was just a different time, and one thing that I respect about these principals these days is the requirements are so much greater, and the things coming at them are so much more complex than what they were. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's an evolving job. Well, I appreciate your willingness to meet with me today. We appreciate the work you're doing, and our goal is for some of the information that we're gathering personally and in groups like this will help us to better craft a principal preparation program for our administrators here in Union County. Thank you very much.
Thank you.